Hello and welcome back to the channel, and thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Today, as you can see, I'm out on location and I've met up with author Guy Anderson. Hello, Guy.
Hello, Richard.
You've been on the show a couple of times. You've been telling us about Tartaria and your research, and I thought it would be interesting to, firstly, nice to come and actually meet you
it's
in
lovely
the
to meet
flesh,
you.
which I think is really good, rather than over Zoom. And I know the viewers quite like it when I'm out and about rather than just the sort of Zoom stuff. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk about the research side of a subject which is certainly not in mainstream history, as in you'd find in ordinary books that you'd get from the library or off places like Amazon and things, and how you go about finding all those nuggets and tidbits of information and then putting them together into a book, which has yet to be published, but you've written the book. It's now in the editing stage, as I remember. So Guy, first of all, let's just give us a brief overview of what the Tartarian Empire as a thing was, or period was, and then tell us a little bit about how easy or difficult, or the approach that you've had, and we're surrounded by books here, which might give us a clue of how you've done it.
Well, the Tartarian Empire, I think, and the Tartarian period are two very different things. So the Tartarian Empire really was Russia and Asia, and it was sort of spanning across into Western Europe. And then it was really their ethos, their technology, their design philosophy, and their use of free energy, semantics, and esoteric numerology, and really working with frequency and balance. That is what span across the world. But from all of the research I've done, after 1776, they slowly replaced the Tartarian Empire with the Mongolian Empire.
And when you say they, you mean the sort of writers of history?
Yes, absolutely, or the victors who write history.
Yes, the victors always write the history.
Yeah, so I think what's happened, and I've seen it within these books, the older books are talking about Tartaria, and as you get to the newer books, sort of early 1900s, Tartaria is replaced with Mongolian.
Right.
And I've seen that a lot.
And does it matter, the semantics of just changing the name? Are they also eradicating those histories and those technologies, rather, the ability to grab electricity from the ether and the various other, the air travel, for example, that seems to have been a thing that we now think of as being an experiment that went terribly wrong with the Hindenburg disasters and things like that. So although they've called it the Mongolians, have they also taken away other elements?
I think that was why they did it.
Right.
I think that's hit the nail on the head. I think by taking away the Tartarian Empire and removing any trace of Tartaria, and it going back to being just a race of nomads that wandered around certain parts of Russia and Asia, you can then say, well, okay, the whole Tartarian thing is an exaggeration, or it never existed. The Tartars were just, these nomads that wandered the desert. And also in biblical terms, Tartarus is referred to as really an abyss, almost like hell itself, a place of a void, if you like, of nothing. And so by removing Tartaria from history as an empire, an ethos, or a movement, or a period of time, some people refer to the Tartarian Empire as the classical period.
Right. And what period are we talking about in dates?
Well,
assuming that the dates are the chronological order we've all been told they are.
Yeah. So if you look at the work of Anatoly Fomenko and people that actually he researched, they say that the timeline has been altered. And within the book, I've got several examples of this. One place in particular is a town in Utah called Manti, and a Freemason, a founder of this new town, actually wrote and it's out there, it's on the internet for everyone to see, that they came to this city and it was deserted. There were houses and buildings everywhere, all empty. And it's actually written in a sermon, in a speech that he gave, and it's called Manti. And what's interesting is there's a particular grocer's in that town that's dated 888 as the year.
Right.
So
and when you say dated, you mean it's on hoarding, it's carved into stone?
Carved in stone, yeah.
888.
888.
And that's not the number of the shop in
No,
the street?
that's the year established.
Right.
The business was established, this particular grocer's was established in 888. So if we follow that theory, it looks like in 1776, 800 years were added to the timeline.
That is quite a claim, isn't it?
Yeah.
But 888, I mean, if you had a building established in 888, that's before the Normans
Exactly.
invaded in England, let
Yeah.
alone in America. America hadn't even been discovered by Western man. If you go by ordinary,
Yeah.
everyday history we're taught in school.
Yes.
So 800 years added to the timeline.
yeah.
For what purpose?
I think that was to explain explain that why we have certain buildings in certain places. I think the Anatoly's sort of theory is that the Dark Ages, a period of time where there is no real recorded history, didn't exist. So how did we go from this incredible architecture that we see, this sort of Greco-Roman style, to before that having really nothing?
Right.
So they call it the Dark Ages, where we evolved and our skill set developed over a vast period of time. And then you can say that it was sort of almost evolution, how we got to where we are today. That then wipes out the need for a race of people, an empire of sorts, to actually go out there and have a particular style of building and a particular way of living. You can remove that and completely remove them off the face of the earth.
And what would be the purpose then of deceiving people by adding 800 years and also trying to wipe out the fact that these buildings, which appear all over the world, and many people now you see on YouTube are looking, and TikTok you'll see people saying, hang on a minute, this building's in China, this is in Peru, this is in Russia, this is in England, America, and they're all as if the same architect had travelled around and built them all on the same afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely.
So why would they want to deceive us from that?
The underlying reason is because they worked on free energy, and this is what Tesla was working on, Nikola Tesla. The buildings were actually engineered in such a way to harness energy from the ether. In addition to that, buildings like churches and cathedrals were used as centres of healing, and with the bells and the
organs.
The organs, of course, which was at the correct frequency designed to heal your internal organs.
Right.
They even had gardens. There's one in Germany called the Tiergarten, where you would walk your pets around, and the design and layout of this particular garden enabled the frequency within it to actually heal your pet.
Oh,
so you could walk around with your dog. And there's no money in that. So it comes down to greed and ultimately control.
So if you can get free energy through these buildings, somebody, names that I won't mention here for the sake of the channel,
Absolutely.
but people can guess with greed and an interest in petrochemicals, could see, well, if we offer an alternative that you have to pay for your electricity or your power, instead of having it free, we can make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the principal reason, you think?
Yeah, I do. And you can see how that's evolved now to the energy crisis that we're all in and the cost of living. But also now the introduction of smart meters. There's always an angle with these people where they do want to control us in some way. And I can see that people that are not following the narrative or are speaking out, the sort of freedom movement, if you like, you can imagine what's going to happen to their smart meters, can't you, before a law-abiding citizen that's playing the game. So this was a reset, and it happened in 1776, and it was the beginning of New World Order. And you can clearly see that if you just look at an American dollar bill, where it has the pyramid, the all-seeing eye, in Roman numerals 1776 underneath it, and in Latin New World Order. And we then had lots of civil wars. Most cities, in fact pretty much every town and city in the planet, had a fire or a flood. A lot of the buildings were destroyed. The civil wars wiped out a lot of the adult population. And then very shortly after that we had the introduction of the Lunacy Act and asylums, orphanages. They popped up everywhere, and prisons.
And it's interesting you say that, because we know that, I mean, the Great Fire of London, 1666, 666, if you want to look at that.
Yeah.
But around that time, and we're filming, you're staying on a little holiday whilst your house is being renovated, which is why we're sitting in this lovely environment. And we're in Devon. And in order to come here, we passed a place, just trying to think of its name now, and I'd been there before and stayed there, and all of it is Georgian. There's not one timber-framed house. And I asked in the museum, I said, how come there's no other houses here? And he said, well, there was a great fire around the time of the Great Fire of London, funnily enough. Maybe afterwards, maybe a bit before. And I've known from just doing my bits of history, so many places had these fires. And of course you just assume, oh yeah, but they lived in timber-frame houses. At some point a fire, an ember is going to burn this place, and it will get out of control because they didn't have the same sort of system we have with fire engines and things. But you'd think that's more systematic.
Yeah, because it happened everywhere over a short period of time.
Yes.
Even where we live in Devon, a building that we used to rent, that we had an art gallery in, the landlord was giving us a bit of history into it, and he said that down in the basement was originally the ground floor, and that behind this stud wall were the original front doors to the building. And you could go out the back of the basement into a courtyard. So clearly...
That's weird.
Yeah, clearly there was an issue there, and he said there'd been a big fire, and what they'd done is they'd pushed all the rubble into the middle of the road and tarmacked over the top of it, and everybody's ground floor became a basement.
Why would you do that? I mean, people would want to have access to their front door, and the municipality would be going, oh, I'm sorry, we're just going to put all the rubbish right in front of your door, tarmac over it, so half a window is here, the other half is still buried. I mean, that's very suspect, isn't it?
Yeah, so you could say that it's easier to fill something in than it is to dig something out.
Yes.
So obviously the game plan was that these fires destroyed a lot of the old buildings.
Right.
The ones that were left just lost their basement, or lost their ground floor, and it became a basement. But the intention of the fires and the floods, and then what we call the mud floods, was actually to destroy and wipe out towns and cities and get rid of the architecture.
And the technology that had free money and stuff. So, okay, so you've given us a lovely overview there, Guy, and I really appreciate that. And maybe people remember the previous videos that we've done. We're surrounded by these books. When something is trying to be hidden from history by the powers that be, it must be, you know, we've heard of like the Great Fire of Alexandria, where they burnt all the books and they got rid of stuff, but evidence is still there. You can't get rid of anything, and if you've got an inquiring mind and determination, presumably it is possible, well, it has been shown to be possible, that you can then find evidence from it. So tell us about how you go about doing that.
Well, your traditional route is to go online and find bookstores that are actually selling first editions. What I've purposely looked for is anything that was written really before 1800,
right.
Before they started rewriting and changing things. I mean, if you could get hold of a book on, let's say, architecture in London written in 1750, I'd love to get hold of something like that, providing it was the first edition, because what we've seen is that often the second editions, third editions are altered. My wife Farina, she's got a book, I think it's by Hans Christian Andersen. It's a set of stories in there, and the first edition has a story about a rather famous or infamous family that are perhaps known to be involved with rather large organisations and secret societies that go all the way back to Amun-Ra and the pharaohs. Now, they're in the story about them appears in the first edition, but it's not in the second. The story's been removed.
And was it complimentary to them?
Not really.
No.
No. And so I think that when you get hold of an old book,
Yes.
if it's printed fairly recently, certainly within the last 100, 150 years, then it's going to be... Guys, fish
Just jumped out of the lake there.
It's often what we've found is it's got things missing. They've
Yes.
taken bits and pieces out. So what we decided to do was actually go into second-hand bookstores and find the old books covered in dust, hidden away at the back, and also the odd charity shop, because our thought is that if you're doing a house clearance, or perhaps an elderly relative dies and you've got the grandchildren going in, the first thing they'll do is they think, well, we'll get something
don't
for the
read books
TV.
anymore, do we?
Yeah, but look at all these old books. No one's going to read those, and they end up in
charity
shops. Now that doesn't happen that often, but we have found in second-hand bookshops in tiny little towns in Devon and Somerset some really obscure books.
And I mean, bookshops, second-hand bookshops have been closing a long time, and the internet has put paid to a lot of that because you can order them online and what have you. And we had a lovely bookshop in Worthing, where I am, called Badger Books, and only in the last 6 months that had gone, and they had all huge range of books. And some of these are very old books. They're not cheap to buy. So they might reside there for a hell of a long time.
Yeah.
And then when the bookshop closes, you wonder what happens to those very old books. But it's those old books that have the hints of times beyond. Have you got any books from, I suppose, 1600s, that sort of period? No.
No. And they are...
And
like
they end
you
up
said,
in Bodleian libraries and different libraries and private art collections or private book collections. And you wonder why.
Yeah.
That then the public can't get it, because you wonder what information is in there that you and I are not privy to get.
I've often thought, I wonder what the library at Eton is like.
Yes.
Is this like Hogwarts kind of thing?
Teaching you all sorts of secrets.
Yeah, but I think you're right. I think that we've had lots of book burnings over the years, and the Great Library of Alexandria is probably, perhaps the
most
biggest
famous,
example of that. And then, of course, the more suspicious of us would assume that the Smithsonians in America and the Vatican in Rome have, at least one of these books that they didn't want us seeing. And why? And then obviously in the Second World War there was another book burning, wasn't there? That was quite a famous one. So I'm assuming that private libraries are going to have the information that we're not allowed to see.
And it's interesting you say that, because just as a completely throwaway, I've been reading a book called The Holy Kingdom by Albert Gilbert, and it gives an alternative story or legitimacy to King Arthur. And he says there were two King Arthurs, and it's all Welsh history. And because, according to the introduction, the supposed professors of history could not read Welsh very well, didn't understand the Welsh language, even though it's the oldest sort of language in these isles, apparently, that so many of the books and information have been kept in private libraries that nobody knew about. And so the modern day historian poo-poos the idea of Arthur being a real person, it's only a myth and blah, blah, blah. But, there's no smoke without fire. And he and a number of other authors have laid forward claims that from these private libraries Arthur did exist, and there were two King Arthurs, and fills in a lot of the history that we don't know about. And of course the information is in private libraries that nobody gets to see unless those private libraries open their doors. And it seems that, again, you're in the same boat. You want to get hold of some of these private libraries to really find out.
Yes.
So we've got a selection of books here that you've found. So you're having to read them all.
Yeah.
And then find references and cross-reference and then build up a story.
Yeah, and it is quite interesting. This one was sent to me actually by a member of our Facebook group, and it's actually Marco Polo, the Voyages and Travels of Marco Polo. Now, this was written in 1894, but for whatever reason, this doesn't refer to the Mongols at all. It refers to Genghis Khan as being the leader of the Tartars. It refers to Tartar women as being Tartaresses, and it is, as you can see from my little post-it notes, it is absolutely rammed full. Everything down to what they wore, the wealth that they had, the jewels that they carried, and the empire. And it clearly states in here, in several places, that they dominated Asia, Russia, and most of the northern hemisphere. It's all in here. And then you go up to a more recent one, which is News from Tartary. This was written by Peter Fleming, Ian Fleming's brother,
Right.
from James Bond fame. And although it's called News from Tartary, the references to Tartary appear on just 3 pages.
Just 3 pages.
Yeah.
So does he refer to Mongols?
He does.
But even though the title of the book, which presumably is what sells the book,
Yeah.
is saying to people, here's some news from Tartary.
Yeah.
So when that was published, people must have had the idea that Tartary was a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though now you talk to the most common or garden person and they'd have no idea. Tartarian, I don't know what that is. Tartar sauce.
That's perhaps the one thing that people will know.
Yes.
Yeah, is their sauce. Yeah.
Which is sauce. And does that have anything to do
It
with
does.
Tartar? Does
yeah,
it?
yeah, it is. It is actually a sauce that they actually
Oh, right.
created. Yeah. Yeah, it is.
How interesting.
Yeah, so there are remnants of it, but so that's what I found, that once you get past a certain period of time, the word Tartary or Tartaria is replaced, and the Tartarian Empire is replaced. Now, this book talks about the Tartarian Empire and how it spanned, across vast. Well, it said that they sent people to the 4 corners of the earth to
Right.
To dominate and influence. And then you get to this, and it's a group of nomads wandering around a desert.
So, I mean, when you think of the Mongols, from what my teaching was at school, which was very, very sparse on anything in Asia, because, and also as a young English kiddie at a 1970s comprehensive school, very limited education, probably on purpose, you just think of these as marauding bandits.
Yes.
Going around. I don't think of them as having this Greco-Romanized beautiful buildings that are all over the world. So how does that, what's the element of that? Were they just marauding bandits, or were they
No.
builders in stone of these fine things with
Yeah.
airships and things?
Yeah, absolutely. But obviously that wasn't back then. This is as they've progressed. But the empire itself really was sort of Russia and Asia. But it's their influence that travelled, and as technology develops and as the skill set develops, what we've seen is anybody that sort of studied Tartary or Tartaria has seen that their influence then span across the northern hemisphere and went into Europe. I would argue that Germany, Dresden in particular, would be a very good example of a Tartarian designed city, where they have clear evidence that they were harnessing energy from the ether, with so many of the buildings with antenna on
Now,
it.
before anybody thinks, oh great, I'll go over and visit Dresden then, didn't something happen to Dresden in the war?
Yeah, absolutely flattened, and
Flattened.
and obviously it was really only a sort of hospital town. It served no military purpose. There was
Right.
nothing based or manufactured there, and an awful lot of refugees there too. And the bombing reached such an extent where people were actually melting to the street as they were trying to run away.
My God.
And once they'd finished bombing, they came back and had another go, and then in went the Mustangs, I believe, and shot whoever was left, including the animals that had escaped from the zoo.
And that was the
Everything.
Allies,
It was.
our allies, us and the Allies,
The Americans.
doing that to Germany
Yeah.
as a supposedly a retaliation
It
for
was-
the Blitz, wasn't
Yeah, it was to put the fear of God into them,
Hmm.
and to really serve as a warning of what they were capable of. But at the time they did that, the war was sort of slowly coming to an end anyway. There was no purpose
So
to doing it, no advantage.
you think
to
they
doing
may
it.
have flattened that because, again, the technology could easily be re-established or learnt from the Tartarian technology and the various Tesla coils or whatever they were using to get the ether and stuff that, of course, those that were funding the war, those bloodline families,
Same people,
the bankers,
yeah,
realised actually we need to, we've got an agenda. We'll get people fighting each other, but at the same time, part of our agenda is we'll wipe this out and this out, so there's no history. They can still keep using our petrochemicals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think
That's
there was a fear, and this was actually, I believe even Cecil Rhodes actually put it in his will. There was a fear that Germany was going to be too technologically advanced and could end up being a superpower and an empire of its own. And I believe that's because they were still operating using the Tartarian technology and harnessing energy from the ether. The buildings were structured in a way where they were using cymatics. So you'd enter a building, a centre of healing, and just the frequency within that building would actually raise your frequency and cure ailments. Also, the more positive the nation, the more positive the workforce are, and the less people that are ill. And that seems to be the philosophy with the
closer
Tartarian.
to a utopia.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which clearly, at the moment, we are further from a utopia than we've ever been. Although we are slowly having people waking up to what is being done to us. So your book will be coming out relatively soon, fingers crossed, down to your editor and what have you, and then published. And of course, we'll get you back on the show to promote it, so people can eagerly buy it. I assume it would be like one of these big, heavy tomes.
It's reasonably heavy. Yeah, it is hardback, but not quite as big as that. But yeah, same size, but not quite as thick. But very specifically, 33 pages of images, photographs, and some of them are quite hard to find, just to help people, because when you're describing how the ether harnessing equipment works on, say, a cathedral, for example, and obviously cathedral coming from the word cathode, these tanks, these what we see as these copperized domes, were actually had inside resonators and capacitors, and they were storing energy. And that energy is then emitted around the locality, and inside these places, you could go in and actually feel that vibration. So what I found is it's quite hard to explain how that works to someone, and how to explain even what a capacitor or a cathode is. So I've had to put in the centre pages images just to help. So.
Well, that's brilliant.
Every now and again you'll be reading through and it'll say refer to this particular image in the centre pages, or actually a quick search on the internet for these key words will help you from here. So I've put a lot of references in just to help people see what I'm trying to describe, because a picture, paints a thousand words.
What, having done all of this research, and obviously you've got the purpose of the book, what do you think this teaches us here today?
It's funny because this is something that I talk about quite a lot, and it starts off with really although it gives people a background into who the Tartarians are and who the 13 bloodline families are, and where they actually originate from and why. Really, the main story, if you like, starts in 1776, which was the beginning of New World Order, the foundation of America, the foundation of the Illuminati, the maritime law. Everything happened around then. So by reading from really what happened at the beginning of this reset, it brings you right up to date to today and the current reset.
So do you think, I mean, I know that we had the WEF and Klaus Schwab saying, this is the great reset. You will own nothing and be happy, and all of this sort of rubbish. And do you think is that a real thing, or is that just them hoping for it or planning for it? Or do you think we are actually in the process of a reset?
I think we're definitely in the process of a reset. Some people would say that started with 9/11, and others would say it started with the pandemic. But yeah, absolutely, we're in a reset. And I've heard several people, including King Charles and Rishi Sunak, referring to this as the fourth industrial revolution, where AI is going to be, really what the biggest push will be. And of course, although we're sort of supposed to embrace this new technology, what people really need to get their heads around is that AI is going to be replacing a lot of what they do too. And so what will we do? If AI is out there and able to do many of the jobs that we perform now, and already it's doing that, well, what do we do? What happens to us?
I remember in the 1970s watching Tomorrow's World, and James Burke and the rest of the team were telling us how we would have this going forward 50 years or whatever, and here we are 50 years hence, saying we'd have so much more leisure time, that there would be a lot of automation and stuff, and maybe they knew vaguely that computers would take over it. I mean, that perhaps they didn't call it AI, artificial intelligence, but they kind of painted this rosy picture that we would be sitting on a little veranda by a pond with beautiful little huts around us and all that, which we are at the moment. But actually, if you look at the world, people are working harder than they've ever done before. You've got two members of the family, both mother and father, having to work to bring up. Back in the 50s, you only had one parent having to go to work, and the mother could, if she chose, stay at home and do housework or look after the home, whatever you want to call it. I don't want to be done for being sexist on that. But now it seems you cannot do that. People can't afford to pay their bills. They're struggling. Houses are being repossessed. This so-called leisure time that we are supposed to be having and enjoying is not here.
No.
So something's gone wrong.
Yeah.
And it seems that it is greed.
Absolutely.
Mostly from these powers that shouldn't be.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the last reset, when, I would argue that what they wanted to do was get rid of the fact that there was, they call it the era of, or the empire of free travel, where people could just travel anywhere in the world, using airships mainly. That went, the free energy went, and we've become very sort of restricted in what we can and can't do without a license for this or a license for that or a passport. Permission. So greed, I think, greed and control of the masses was the cause of the last reset in 1776, and to wipe out free energy. Well, this reset that we're going through now appears to be the build-up to it, making it almost impossible for some people to actually make ends meet. And we're seeing mental health issues go through the roof, and suicide, particularly with men, is reaching astronomical proportions now.
And let's not forget that a certain medical intervention was pushed left, right and centre, and pretty much forced on people to take something which has turned out not to be at all beneficial, it would seem. So let me, as we come to the end then, let me ask you, if we're going through another reset, and you've been talking about the last reset, do you think that we are clever enough to survive this reset? Will we come through it? Or is it a fate accompli that everything will be reset and there'll only be a few people, and they may be the ones rich enough or members of certain bloodline families that will survive?
That's a sort of that's quite a difficult question to answer, because
that's why I asked it.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Because I keep seeing people like Mark Zuckerberg and Dwayne Johnson and other sort of elites, or people that have become a member of the elite. They're not quite on the bloodline family rung of the ladder, but they're not far behind. Now, they're all building underground bunkers. Now, why are they doing that? So they're obviously preparing for something to happen. Whether or not the rest of us can survive something of that scale, I don't know. But the last sentence of my book is that if we could all unite, and let's say, for example, on Monday morning, everybody that watches your show said, we're not going to use Tesco's today, or Amazon, or BP, we're going to boycott it. You imagine the influence we could have just on a chain of shops or petrol stations, or if we all decided not to go to work on Monday morning. So I think the problem is they've put so much out there now to divide people, whether it's, you know, religion, I think to a certain extent, maybe even sport, where you've got two neighbours that actually support completely different teams that one minute get on fine and put them in a stadium on the right day, and they could be at each other's throats.
And those teams may not be in the town that they live.
No, absolutely.
You know,
yeah, so
they are living in Bournemouth, and one may, you know, support Manchester,
Yeah.
another one Leeds, and you think, hang on a minute, you're not even supporting anything local. We've
No.
lost a lot of that local connection with our neighbours.
And I think the pandemic did do that, where they're actually encouraging us to report the next door neighbour if they had friends round and so on. So I think they're using the Roman tactic of divide and conquer. They're getting us to actually fight amongst ourselves. If we unite, then we can stop this from happening. There are a lot more people awake, as you know, now than there ever have been. But can we get enough? So I think there's an argument for us all pushing to wake as many people up as possible. There's also an argument for us looking to get like-minded people together and getting off-grid and high up, and we'll ride this out. And if they do, if there is a cataclysmic event, then perhaps there'll be enough of us to be waiting for those bunkers to open. We'll have it on our terms this time.
So when they come out staring into the bright sunshine from their mole-like existence, like whack-a-mole,
Absolutely,
we can knock
whack-a-mole.
them back in.
Yeah.
Guy, thank you so much for telling us about it. What is the title of your book?
Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids.
Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids, published sometime this year.
Yes.
Available, and I'll let you know because we'll be in contact, of course. But in the meantime, from deepest, darkest Devon, here am I. Thank you so much for agreeing to put me up and look after me whilst we came to do this and show me some of these old remarkable books. I'll be back, of course, with more monologues and more wonderful interviews. But until next time, from Guy and myself, thanks for watching. Goodbye.
Bye.